Hello again. I am Joe, and I'm going to give you another book review, another one I had just finished recently. And this one I'm actually very happy to talk to you about because it is a book I've been looking to read for a while. And without further ado, let's just jump right on into it. This is The Coddling of the American Mind. It's a book that was written by two gentlemen who is Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. And to give a little bit of background, Greg Lukianoff is an attorney and is a journalist, and Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist. So the two of these gentlemen got together and they wrote this one book. I'm going to tell you all about it. I'm going to tell you my opinions of it and move from there. The full title of it is The Coddling of the American Mind: How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. This book was written within the last decade or so, but it does cover a lot of what we've been seeing on college campuses, on people's feelings from about 2005 to 2017. There's just been some ramping up of certain behaviors and certain reactions to things. So that's what we got in this book today. Now, why did I read it? Number one, it was a gift. Notoriously, my wife is telling me that I am just so difficult to shop for, never know what to get you. So when she was having conversations in our family circle, one of them suggested this, and lo and behold, she went off to the store and bought it, wrapped it up, and gave it to me. Which is fantastic, too, because I had actually heard about these gentlemen, and I heard about the book and what it has to do, and what it has to say, and I've been thinking about buying it anyway, so it just fit perfectly as a gift. I'm very thankful for my wife for picking it up. I've actually seen Jonathan Haidt on YouTube pretty often. He's been on Real Time with Bill Maher. I've seen him on the Joe Rogan Experience. He did a big debate with Sam Harris at least once, if not more than that. And I know that he also has another debate which he talked about called The Moral Roots of Liberals and Conservatives. So I've seen him a number of times, actually in person or in these interviews and when he does his speeches. He's a very laid back and a very calm spoken person. And it's just nice to hear thoughts and concepts just done in a very calm way. It's not very reactionary, not trying to shock jock it out there. It's like, these are my observations. This is how I came to my conclusions. You can agree or disagree if you wish, but I'll give you all the sources of how I came to my conclusion if he references something. So, moving forward. So like I said, Greg Lukianoff is the attorney and journalist, and Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist. So, what does social psychology do is it kind of looks at the social landscape, and based on the observations, we'll see trends. Now, it will then go one step further to try to find out reasons for the trends. But at its base level, it's saying, what did we observe, and can we actually recreate this in some other fashion? And then you have someone who's a journalist and an attorney who's mainly one that can organize their thoughts on paper and put any ideas or any points very succinctly and pushes them forward. Now, I personally do not know how much of this book was physically written by the attorney or physically written by the social psychologist, but it holds true. In fact, very, very long ago, I was considering going to the FBI, and one of the things I had heard was a very common thing that they said was that the FBI always looks for people like lawyers and accountants, and that would be like their workforce staff for the most part, because they can put thoughts into paper and give it to someone else who can just read the paper and get all those thoughts off of it. Not throwing emotion into it, not throwing, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? No, literally just typing out the sentences that are necessary for someone to actually know what you mean and hear what you're saying. So these two gentlemen originally, I think, just put this together as an article, and they published it in The Atlantic. And at the time, I believe, if I read this correctly, the title of the article was Arguing Toward Mystery: How College Campuses Teach Cognitive Distortions. Could be a mouthful. So to go one step further, let's talk about what a cognitive distortion is. Basically, it's how your brain processes information based on filters that you've kind of created over your lifetime or over your experiences or things that you have been exposed to. So these filters, and they could be things that were taught to you intentionally versus things you just picked out on your social circle. So it can be given to you either willfully or you can have absorbed it subconsciously. It also comes into play whatever your personal level of anxiety is that's going to actually process information that you receive. So, for instance, if you're a person who has the belief that the world is inherently racist, everything that you see is going to be because of racism or the result of racism. That's everything. That's literally the lenses that you're seeing the world through. It's how you process the world. Now, cognitive distortions also, it focuses on the negative and ignores the positive. Always going to look for the darkest meaning of why something is in front of you and not anything that could be an accident or a positive thing of the reason why it's there. People with this kind of cognitive distortion, they polarize their points of view. It's going to be in either us or them. You're with us or you're against us. That's it. And with this, there's going to be vast amounts of overgeneralization when you're trying to group people together or group behaviors together. The results of anything that happens is going to be overly catastrophized in your mind, and you're going to look towards blaming a group or blaming a system, and that's going to be the reason why something happened. So that's what's happening here, is they're saying that some college campuses and how we rear people have gotten them to have these kind of distortions, and therefore when the absorption of information comes into the mind, it's already through these dark colored lenses that are going to make it see nothing bright and shiny so much, but that negative thing is the reason why this is happening. Again, psychology. It's one of these things that it's a science, and you can observe things and say what you observe. And then apart from that, there's the reasons why it is what it is, the takeaway. One thing I'd like you to take away, if you ever picked up this book, is just understand this is not a political book. Again, it's talking about social sciences. It's about observations. The observations themselves aren't exactly left-wing or right-wing. They're just observations. But because if you have some kind of cognitive distortion, you might have a different takeaway on what you see, and that might color what you're seeing into whatever light you want to see it in. Sometimes observations are just at face value. For instance, there's an observation. You see 20 people in a group in front of you. 5 of them are female. That's an observation. Now, a takeaway would be more like, there are 5 women in the group in front of you, and that's because of the patriarchal society that's just a tyranny against women. That's not an observation. That is a judgment call based on an observation. And that's what we'll talk about. And there are some experiments done in this kind of thing to see, how can someone come up with that kind of a theory when they see something. And that's where social scientists try to take their observations and see if they can actually recreate it in an experiment, a social experiment, and see if it actually makes sense. Does the population naturally go in this direction? Or is it a one-off because you're looking at a specific region and that's what that region does? Does the Northeast in America do things the same way that the denizens of Bangladesh do? If you took 20 from here randomly and 20 from there randomly, would you come to the same subset? Or does local culture come into play? Again, what can you measure and what can you actually derive from it? One of the experiments they talk about in this as well talks about just arbitrarily mixing up people into 2 different groups and seeing how they interact. So for instance, in the experiment, they might have something like big old jar of jelly beans. guess the number of jelly beans. And everyone gives their guesses, and maybe they say, okay, we'll put one group over here. You're the people who overestimated the jelly beans. And then the other groups over here, you're the group that underestimated the jelly beans. Again, not saying that an overestimation or an underestimation is good or bad. It's just you did that and you did this. Very arbitrary. You can do the same thing with people in a room and just have them flip a coin one time. And the people who flip a head, you go into that section over there, and the people who flip a tail, you go in that section over there. No other rhyme or reason, just saying we're going to separate you into two different groups. And what generally happens is the group you're a part of is now considered your in-group. And those people over there, they're the out-group. So if you do something like, on paper, allot everybody a given amount of money, and say, now spread this out and share it with everybody in the whole room. Not just your group, the whole room. They find out that the people in the in-group share more money with other members of the in-group than they do people who are in the out-group. They just automatically had their own tribalism and tried to take care of their tribe versus taking care of everybody. It's just a behavior. It happens, and they've measured it, and other people can do the experiment as well. And the fact that it's just things that happen kind of give you more credence that it's not a political event, or at least not political in the way we understand it normally today. That's pretty much all I'll say about that. I mean, any other descriptions you want to see, I'd say go pick up a Dr. Seuss. One more time. Pick up a Dr. Seuss, read the Sneetches, and you'll get more of a color on what I'm saying. So, based on that, you could say it comes from a very observational, non-political point of view, and we move from there. So, how does this work? This coddling of the mind. How is this going on? What is the basis? Well, they broke down what they call the three great untruths. And they are the untruth of fragility. You know, people, especially children, they think that they're fragile little snowflakes and need to be coddled. They need to be safety. They need to be actually set aside and let nothing bad happen to them. And I say that's not true. I mean, what happens is we're not fragile. In fact, we're the opposite of fragile. We're anti-fragile. These things that you're trying to save kids from, don't break them. Generally, it will make them a little bit stronger. Let a child make their own mistakes, and they'll grow into better adults. They have to know what they can do, so the ability to learn and grow. They have to have the consequences of their actions, and that consequence will say, oh, wait a minute, now I know not to do that any longer. I got to do this over here. Now, granted, you're not going to put them in a room full of sharp knives and see what happens. You will save them from that. But at other times when they're playing with scissors, or they're using scissors, should I say, and they're not like 3, you can be like, here's scissors. And if they happen to nick their finger, now they're starting to learn about scissors. And they're not using the latest chef knife that if they touch their finger, 3 of them will come off. Those are drastic consequences. They talk about concept creep in fragility. That, for instance, there's things like the word trauma. Trauma is now an overused word. And right now, it's having little impact with the actual use of trauma. It's just being applied to almost any other case. And like I said, we talked about safetyism. You're trying to keep your kid from playing with certain things, they're never going to learn and grow. In fact, that's one of the things they talk about in some detail here is things like peanut allergies. We know that some kids have peanut allergies, so we can have no peanut butter jelly sandwiches maybe in a school. Well, one of the reasons for this may be related to when you hear about peanut allergies, a parent may have completely avoided nuts in any kind when their child was growing and going through the development stages. Well, it turns out that the avoidance of peanuts is causing the peanut allergy. Whereas, and I know we did this with our own children, when you look at the appropriate age group, you start introducing things like peanut butter and almonds and nuts and whatever into their diet and see what the results are. A person can have a natural allergy. But if you introduce it in the right amounts, at the right points of time, you can actually prevent that from being what could be either a mild irritation to a life-threatening condition by introducing it when they're young and not being safety about it and bringing it back. Okay, that was the first untruth. The second one deals with emotional reasonings. They have a quote in here from Epictetus that says, "What frightens us isn't like an external event or something in front of us, but it's what we think of that thing." People probably have this conversation regarding the gun debate. Just a gun on a table can set people off. It can be like, oh my God, why is that there? And then it can become something completely in one degree saying that should not even exist, destroy it. Whereas on the other degree, someone can see that and look at it as a tool. It can look at it for a weapon for the time when you need a weapon, because there might be times where you need a weapon through protection and safety, and moving from there. So it's not the thing, it's the opinion of the thing that's causing the most emotion. Another thing with emotional reasoning, and it gets into the crux of the story here, it's not the actions of a person, but it's what you think of the actions of them. The term microaggressions have become a thing. And one thing about microaggressions is there are times that some people might try to dig on you on purpose. It's for a fact that they're trying to give you this little bing and move forward. People do it in conversation all the time. But it's those that do it accidentally or completely unintentionally. They get lumped into this. The sheer fact that something was said at all means that you are a monster and you should be gone against. So microaggressions are touchy because other people have a different interpretation of them through their emotional reasoning and their cognitive dissonance. You know, when somebody does something or says something, if you automatically think of what they said in the least hospitable way, you know, and be the least generous with the motivations of the person who said or did something, you're just going downwards. They did it intentionally and deliberately against me. And you're not going to address possibly what their best intentions is and make that your first result. Your first result is, oh my God, I can't believe you did this, and boom. Moving forward, about the third untruth that they talk a lot about here is the us versus them mentality. This goes back into the tribal thinking in the experiment we talked about above. You know, because of tribal thinking, it's just your in-group that has to stay together and will combat anything else around them. Identity politics kind of makes their way in here too, where back in the days of civil rights leaders, identity politics kind of had more of a common humanity aspect to them. I mean, today's Martin Luther King Day. So we're off of work, we're off of school, but remembering the actions, remembering the speeches that Martin Luther King did, talked about how you don't demonize the enemy. You make them one of you. And say us as people need to work towards this kind of a solution together. You know, don't group us and don't group them. And they have done this to us, they have oppressed us. Say we have noticed a depression, an oppression, and we're going to go to that because it will allow all of us to rise and come to a better utopia than we can possibly get now fractured. And not only Martin Luther King, people like Nelson Mandela and even Gandhi had done this. Common humanity politics. People are starving. Let's try to work together and get some food to some people and maybe reallocate. You have some excess here that's going to go spoil and go to waste. Let's move it to the people who can need it. That's common humanity in identity politics. Whereas the other side of the fence is identity politics that are common enemy. Again, the tribalism. My in-group is the good group. That one is the bad group. Fight them. They're doing something wrong again. So, the three great untruths. Fragility, emotional reasoning, us versus them. Now, they go further, saying, what led to this? And it doesn't start so much of like why this is the most important now. They actually go more into the extreme examples that are happening more often of where this is shown as the negative, and then they go into the how we got there after that. So the extreme examples that are on there are, for instance, Milo Yiannopoulos. I think he went to Berkeley in 2017, perhaps. And people said, cancel him. Don't let him come to the campus. And what happened was that there was actually physical violence at the event. I think possibly before the event even occurred, to prevent him from speaking at all. And what happens here is, and I mentioned it shortly above with MLK, it's like you're demonizing the alter opinion from what you have. So you've already had your in-group, out-group thing, and Milo's might be in the out-group, so the in-group says, you're not even a person. You're not even a human being. And therefore, use violence in the protest, because it's fully justifiable and fully actionable. And this occurred, and I believe that the event was kind of canceled. And the people who caused the violence kind of got to walk away. So that's like one of the events that actually you can look at and say, this is where this goes wrong. A couple other events that occurred, that there was a campus protest at Yale, which you would think this would affect Yale, but apparently it affects everywhere. And I believe this was about calling for the firing of a staff member, and it had something to do with Halloween costumes and a letter that was written and sent out to the whole population of the students saying good costumes, bad costumes, and there was things in that nature. I've seen videos of this. You can actually YouTube this as well. Yale protests, disagreements, and it just gets ugly fast. And as this happens, if you have an uprising of students against a professor, you will find other professors that agree with that professor just being silent. Because this guy might go down and have to resign and lose his job. They're not going to follow that trend. So this protest, it kind of feeds on itself. And even when someone's trying to answer questions from the students saying, no, let's look at it from this perspective, just getting shouted down. And you will not talk to me that way, even though it's trying to be rational. Another of the big extremes was what happened at Evergreen. This story is, I first heard this on Joe Rogan, and it was actually Brett Weinstein who was talking about his experience at Evergreen, and it just looked like mob mentality has just culminated, where they were doing something I think they used to do on campus every year called like a day of absence. And that was the day that they said, okay, I believe a lot of the minority students won't go to classes on this day and they won't report to work. So you can look what it looks like on this campus if you're missing an entire section of people. And just take that, think about it, look at any repercussions, and just understand how important everyone is in a campus and in a society. I think in this time frame, they tried to reverse it. They said, something, why are the minorities staying home that day? Why don't all the white people stay home that day? If you work here or if you go here, we don't want to see you on campus. Again, I don't think it was this harsh, but it's like you stay home and have only these minority students be all over campus. And that's possibly even a stronger vision. That's a stronger thing that you can bring home and say, wow, okay, let me ruminate on this. Let me take actions either for myself, for other people, or as a group. Brett Weinstein, I believe, had different opinions on this, and he went to work. He wasn't going to be a part of this, and I think he got, withheld in a room, and he was practically captured and imprisoned and yelled at by students who wouldn't let him even go to the bathroom, who wouldn't let him talk with his hands. It just got really aggressive and really weird fast. I think at one time he actually was able to get out of the room and they were kind of done with him. But even then, I think they sent out the equivalent of raiding parties through campus searching for him. And they're like, you better not come into campus today because something might happen. So, again, these are some highly visible things. You can do some research on those. Um, but they believe that these things that you're seeing are the results of some untruths and some safetyism and how we got there. So let me jump back to what I was saying before about how did we get there, in their opinion. And how they got there is, I guess there was an increase in polarizing trends that have occurred since like the 80s, where I'm not going to say everyone was kind of on a level playing field until the 80s, but in the 80s, things started to take that tribalism, like us versus them mindset, and it was in small doses originally, and those just kind of grew and grew and grew unchecked. Polarization. One of the other things they talk about is through 2000s and so on, teenagers were just showing more and more signs of anxiety problems and depression. Those rates were climbing dramatically. Some people were giving some thought to it, saying, you know something, this is what they call the iGen generation, the internet generation. This is the one immediately after the Gen Z. I'm sorry, the millennials, which might have been Gen Z as well, but they said millennials, then iGen. And what was happening is there was this increased use of the internet, and it was being used for hella long periods of time. Many hours of the day were just on the internet. And one of the things that kind of fed into itself was this, what they called FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. Where if someone posts a picture or they talk about a party they went to, the people who weren't at the party now are missing out on something. So they have to try to now be part of the party crowd. And it just kind of feeds on itself like an Ouroboros, just the snake eating its own tail. Another thing that they talk about is during those years as well, parents and overprotection became a thing, where parents were safetying their children in such a way, keeping them away from anything that might possibly be a setback, a failure, something that the kid might hurt themselves on. And I'm not talking about like breaking arms so much as, maybe chipping their finger with a pair of little scissors. There were some things that parents just kind of bubbled and overprotected and helicopter parents, and it just made children not ready to know their own limits and their growth potentials to then become better adults. Participation trophies became a thing. One of the things I always talk about when it comes to that is we always look at, say, millennials and iGen saying, oh, we have participation trophies, therefore they think they deserve everything. And my comment on this is, well, you know something? They didn't give themselves the trophies. It was their parents or their teachers or someone else that just said, listen, got to be fair to everybody. Everyone gets a trophy. We'll play sports and not keep score so everyone just has fun with the game. Again, that feeds into overprotection. So you didn't let them make their own mistakes. You didn't allow children unsupervised play. Let them climb up on the chair. Let them get on top of the table. Let them fall from reasonable heights and understand, wow, I can't do that anymore. That's my limitation. Or let them fall and say, wow, okay, now if I roll a little bit, I can step up higher in the tree and I'll fall better, and now I actually know what my limitations are. Might help with sports, might help with a career, you never know. Now, safetyism is not something that only was done by parents and maybe professors in a college, or say by teachers or whatever, but safetyism does have a CYA component to it. Cover your ass from ever doing anything that might even look bad on your name, your reputation, or your company. This is where we talk about universities, we're talking about companies, and we talk about capitalism in general. It used to be a thing way back in the day, and it is valid, where you say, okay, sneaker company X uses low-wage children factories out in foreign land Y, and they're paying these people $1 a week to make 500 shoes a week. So that is slavery of a certain sort. And therefore, when that comes to light, and this is how these things are manufactured, and by the way, maybe this sneaker is sold for $200 a pair, look at all the profit going into the company's pockets. So it's one of those things we're saying, that's a negative thing. Wow, you're a negative company. You shouldn't be selling this anymore. We all boycott your goods. You should go out bankrupt. Safetyism, CYA. Now they're going to try to like change how they do things, and maybe they don't use things from company Y, or country Y, and they'll try to like change their practices, maybe give more jobs to the domestic site of the company and move forward from there. Another thing that made this a how we got there kind of thing was what they considered as a quest for justice. It's people who seek out any flaw or mistake of a person or a company or an organization and taking that flaw, whether it be one or a couple, and catapulting it into the nth degree of saying, wow, you are evil corp, or you're evil person because of this event and therefore. So for some reason, people got very adamant in their nature to find justice and mete it out, almost like a vigilante would. So, how do we get there? Those kind of things. Polarization, anxiety increasing, overprotection, safetyism, and it all coming to like a perfect storm of when some of these children grow up and now become young adults in college, and now they start hearing other data, and this has become their own mindset, how they filter the world. Again, possibly a cognitive distortion, and then it becomes what it becomes. Now, they have to go into it further saying, how do we fix this? We've acknowledged that something is going on. Let's call it a problem, and we've acknowledged the problem. Now let's try to fix it. And it kind of comes down to education and spending one-on-one time. You would need wiser children. You have to let them make their own mistakes in order for them to learn what their own capabilities are. We need wiser universities, not to constantly CYA and run for cover. Say, listen, this is our policy. We're going to have some classes here. You can see what the class is going to talk about. You can elect to take the class. But you can't hear something in the class and call for the teacher to be fired. We're going to stand by our curriculum. We're going to stand by our teachers. And if these classes are something that you have to take because you have to find the justice in them, we're going to ask you to leave. Or we're going to work with you. We're going to talk about what it was that you totally thought that was out of left field, or totally thought that was just disingenuous and was a actual aggression on anybody who heard that topic. And we'll work together and try to say what's a better way to say it versus what's not. Another way is wiser businesses. Yes, a business should not be using slave labor from another country in order to make the most profit over here. But in the meantime, there can be ways that they say, this is our business, this is the food we serve, and this is how you're going to get it. The fact that you want to come into the seafood restaurant and you want a bowl of cereal, no, we don't give bowl of cereals here. There's the door, you can leave. And that's it. So, if everyone were able to keep these trends going, we can actually fix how negative some things have happened. So, again, I took this thing at 30,000 feet, maybe a little 20,000 feet, but this actually was a very good eye-opening book. Like I said, some of the concepts I already heard Jonathan Haidt speak about in forums, in interviews. So I was already ready for half this book to begin with. But maybe some people haven't heard anything about him or any of these concepts. I totally suggest you read The Coddling of American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. And this is the kind of thing you can have at a book club. This is the kind of thing that you can actually share among your friends. I've said once before, there's a small number of books that if I ever see it, for sale at a used bookstore on a wall or in a box, I'll pick it up and I'll hand it to someone else saying, hey, I think you should give this a shot. Again, it's not saying anything about politics. It's not saying the right and wrong of people in general. It's just saying, you know something? I think over the years, certain trends have occurred. We've observed them, we've measured them, and I think that they've all met together at one location or in one group or in one area of thought. And it's causing these things which are having other effects somewhere else. And you know something? Maybe we should hit the brakes on those and kind of come together again and can work together and communicate more. And that will bring us to where it is. So, that's my report on this book. Hopefully you found it interesting. I'd like to see you go pick it up. In fact, it was funny, after my wife had bought me this book to read and she heard about it and was interesting, she actually went out and got the audiobook from the library, which she listens to in the car as she's like driving to and from work and so on and so forth. So it's already starting to spread in our own family, where someone had referenced it, it was bought for me, and now she's listening to the audiobook. So, hey, take from it what you will. Otherwise, thank you for listening. I hope you have another pleasant day, pleasant week, pleasant month, pleasant life. All right? Bye-bye now.